I'm here.
How you feeling? How's the ankle? I mean, what do you love about these?
I feel good.
Yeah, we're okay.
I'm feeling good.
Who could have imagined that behind the face of Hollywood's most daring action hero, there was a man quietly drowning in silence? Tom Cruise. The name alone evokes adrenaline, speed, and invincibility. But while the world saw a man who ran faster than time and clung to the edge of planes at 10,000 feet, few knew the storm that raged behind his signature smile. For decades, Cruise was the embodiment of control, on screen, in interviews, and even in his most private moments. But what if that control wasn't power, but a shield? What if the man who never aged, never failed, never fell, was actually falling for years? There were whispers about his family, his faith, his broken loves, and his haunted past. Stories buried under blockbuster headlines, pain wrapped in million-dollar stunts. The truth, it seems, was always hiding in plain sight. But no one wanted to look. Until now. Because at 62, the tragedy of Tom Cruise isn't just about a man. It's about the cost of becoming more than human in a world that never lets you be just a man. And in this story, we will see Tom Cruise not the superstar, but the son, the seeker, the scarred soul who dared to dream and paid a price no one ever saw coming. Before the world ever knew his name, Thomas Cruise Mapother IV was just a small, trembling boy in Syracuse, New York, the son of a broken family, hidden behind the thin walls of rented apartments and restless nights. He wasn't born into stardom. He was born into survival. His father, Thomas Mapother III, was a man few dared to challenge not because of greatness, but because of violence. Tom once described him, bluntly and without hesitation, as a merchant of chaos. He was the kind of person, Cruise later revealed, where, if something goes wrong, they kick you. It was a great lesson in my life, how he'd lull you in, make you feel safe, then bam. Tom never knew when the next blow would come physically, emotionally, or psychologically. Home wasn't safety. It was suspense. His mother, Mary Lee, did everything she could to shield her children, but the weight was unbearable. Tom was only 12 when she finally walked away from the chaos, taking her kids with her. But freedom came at a price: poverty. The family moved frequently, sometimes 3 times in a single year. New schools, new faces, new humiliations. Tom, small for his age and struggling with dyslexia, was often the target of cruel jokes. Words danced on the page, but refused to land in his mind. Reading became a battlefield. Teachers called him lazy. Classmates laughed. Inside, Tom collapsed. He once said, "I'd try to concentrate, but I'd feel like my head was underwater." He had no friends, no stable home, no guiding hand. Just a growing sense that he didn't belong anywhere. But somewhere in that silence, a spark ignited a need to prove he was more than what the world saw. That he was not weak, not broken, not stupid, that he mattered. Still, long before he would ever run on rooftops or pilot fighter jets on screen, Tom Cruise ran from fear, from failure, and from a father who left not only bruises, but questions. Because the day his father disappeared from his life, he left no note, no goodbye, just absence. And for a boy so hungry for approval, that absence burned deeper than any wound. Years later, Cruise would stand before millions, worshipped like a god of cinema. But deep inside, the boy from Syracuse still whispered, "Will someone finally see me?" Tom Cruise wasn't supposed to be famous. He was too short, too intense, too dyslexic, too different. In the world of glittering smiles and perfect diction, he was a nervous outsider, a boy who couldn't read a script out loud without stammering, sweating, stumbling, but that didn't stop him from trying. His first taste of acting came not on screen, but on a stage so small it barely held the dreams of the kids who stood on it. It was a high school production of Guys and Dolls, and Tom, then just 17, played Nathan Detroit. He didn't have the confidence, but he had hunger. For the first time, someone clapped for him, not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because he moved them. That sound would haunt him forever. He thought, maybe this is what it feels like to be enough. After graduating, he took a leap no one in his family dared before. He left everything behind and moved to New York City, a suitcase, a few dollars, and a fire inside. He scrubbed restaurant floors, carried luggage, worked odd jobs, anything to survive, anything to stay close to auditions. He failed his first, then his second, then his third. Casting directors told him he was too intense, too raw, not leading man material. His dyslexia made cold reads painful. He'd memorize entire pages just to keep up. But Cruise never quit. He shared a tiny apartment with 5 roommates. He ate canned beans for dinner, and he kept going. Eventually, a minor role in Endless Love, 1981, gave him his first on-screen appearance. It lasted mere seconds, but it was enough. Then came Taps, and something changed. His performance caught eyes, his fire, his unpredictability, his screen presence. It couldn't be ignored. Yet even then, success didn't come wrapped in a bow. He was still broke, still anonymous, still running uphill. But the tipping point arrived with Risky Business, 1983. The moment he slid across the hardwood floor in a pink dress shirt and socks, Hollywood found its new obsession. But what the world saw as effortless charm was actually the result of years of rejection, humiliation, and inner war. Behind the sunglasses was a boy still terrified he wasn't good enough. Cruise once said, "Every time I walk on a set, I still hear the voices from when I was a kid telling me I'll never make it. And that's exactly why I keep going." This wasn't a rise, it was a rebellion. A rebellion against a childhood that tried to silence him. A rebellion against a world that said, "You don't belong." And for every cheer he earned, he remembered the quiet nights when no one clapped. By the late 1980 seconds, Tom Cruise was no longer a name. He was an empire. Top Gun turned him into an icon. The Color of Money earned him respect. Rain Man won the Oscars. And by the time Born on the 4th of July hit theaters, Cruise wasn't just Hollywood's golden boy, he was the storm and the calm, the spectacle and the soul. He was 26. And the world bowed to him. Studio heads fought for him. Directors molded films around his presence. Every magazine, every late-night show, every red carpet, they didn't just feature Tom Cruise. They revolved around him. But inside the tornado of fame, something twisted. To the public, Cruise was charming, driven, focused. But behind closed doors, he was meticulous, obsessively so. Every scene had to be perfect. Every word, every look, every emotion had to land exactly as intended. He pushed his body beyond its limits, performed his own stunts, rehearsed relentlessly, and micromanaged edits. Not out of arrogance, but out of fear. Fear that if he wasn't excellent, he'd disappear. Those childhood ghosts never left. They just dressed in tuxedos and followed him to premieres. Cruise began crafting not just characters, but versions of himself. The maverick, the agent, the assassin, the hero. Each role became a layer of armor, hiding the uncertain man beneath. He earned Golden Globes, multi-million-dollar paydays, and complete creative control. But along the way, something more fragile began to fracture. His first marriage to Mimi Rogers ended quietly. His second, to Nicole Kidman, ended painfully. And through it all, he smiled. Reporters often remarked on how Tom Cruise never seemed tired, never seemed shaken. But that was the trick. He had to seem invincible, because being human was dangerous. Even as he dominated the 90 seconds with A Few Good Men, Jerry Maguire, and Eyes Wide Shut, Cruise's personal world became increasingly guarded. Fewer friends, more handlers, less laughter, more control. A longtime colleague once said, "Tom doesn't rest. He doesn't slow down. He runs from something, but I don't think even he knows what." In 1999, he stood at the peak of his fame, critically adored, commercially untouchable, and globally beloved. But behind the crafted image, behind the rehearsed charm, behind the eyes that had seen both glory and rejection, there was a man who had it all, except peace. He had outrun poverty, outshined every doubt, outworked every competitor. But the one thing he couldn't escape was himself. And that, perhaps, is the tragedy that no amount of box office success can cover. At first, the cracks were small. A strange interview here, a guarded answer there. But in Hollywood, it only takes one slip to turn admiration into ridicule. In 2005, Tom Cruise walked onto the Oprah Winfrey Show and jumped on the couch. What was meant to be a celebration of love became a turning point in public perception. The internet exploded. Late-night hosts mocked him. Memes were born. For the first time in his career, Cruise became a punchline. But that was only the beginning. Later that year, a tense interview with Matt Lauer on The Today Show saw Cruise passionately criticize psychiatry and pharmaceutical drugs. His comments weren't just controversial, they were personal, pointed, and jarring. Millions watched in real time as Hollywood's golden boy transformed into a polarizing figure. Critics called him arrogant. The media called him unhinged. Studio executives, once desperate to cast him, began pulling back. Paramount Pictures, his longtime home, ended their partnership in 2006, citing his unacceptable public behavior. He was 44, and for the first time since Top Gun, the throne was shaking. But deeper than the public fallout was the isolation. Cruise's growing involvement with the Church of Scientology became a target for headlines. Once a private believer, he was now the religion's most vocal and visible advocate, and that visibility came with consequences. Stories began to emerge about how roles were declined based on belief systems, how relationships strained under the pressure of control, how Cruise's inner circle seemed more curated than connected. When his marriage to Katie Holmes ended in 2012, the silence around the split was deafening. Rumors swirled, allegations flew. The woman once introduced as the love of his life filed for divorce in secret, reportedly out of fear for their daughter, Suri. And Tom Cruise? He vanished from her world. He was no longer just losing roles. He was losing people. He once famously said, "I don't hide from pain. I run through it." But even the strongest runners need rest, and Cruise never stopped. Friends grew distant. His children from previous marriages, especially his daughter with Holmes, became ghosts in his public life. The smile remained, but it no longer reached his eyes. Behind blockbuster franchises and press tours, the man was alone in a room full of applause. A former crew member once said, "Tom is the most charming man you'll ever meet, but once the camera stops rolling, he disappears." At 50, he was still sprinting across screens, breaking bones for Mission Impossible, flying jets for Top Gun, Maverick, and refusing to let age slow him down. But at what cost? He broke box office records, but lost birthdays. He earned billions, but missed memories. He saved cinema in the pandemic, but could not save the simple threads of everyday love. And somewhere in between the hero roles and the studio lights, Tom Cruise became a myth. A man so carefully curated, so obsessively preserved, that the real Tom, the boy who longed to be seen, may have been buried beneath the legend he created. There's something haunting about a man who outruns everyone, including himself. Tom Cruise was no longer chasing fame. He had caught it, broken it, rebuilt it in his image. But after the chaos, after the scandal, After the silence of family slipping away, he began chasing something else. Meaning. He didn't give speeches. He didn't cry on talk shows. He didn't write memoirs. But his choices began to whisper louder than words. He became a producer, not just for control, but for responsibility. Every set he walked on as if it were a promise to create, to protect, to perfect. Not for ego, but for the people who believed movies still mattered. While others aged into comfort, Cruise pushed himself further, learning to fly helicopters, climbing cliffs without doubles, hanging from planes. Not to prove he was invincible, but because he believed that the audience deserved his full heart, or nothing at all. Colleagues say he arrives before anyone else, leaves last, knows every crew member's name, checks every safety harness twice. One director said, "He's not acting for awards anymore, he's acting for purpose." But beyond the cameras, his life grew quieter. He stopped talking about relationships, stopped posing with family, stopped explaining his choices. Maybe because he finally understood that peace doesn't come from being understood. It comes from accepting what will never be fixed. He began spending long periods in England, far from the chaos of Los Angeles, far from headlines. He kept working but lived smaller, more controlled, more distant. Still, when Top Gun Maverick premiered in 2022, something miraculous happened. Audiences cried, not for the jets, not for the nostalgia, but because, somehow, the boy who once begged to be seen finally was. Vulnerable, weathered, human. It wasn't just a movie. It was a homecoming. For a man who had sacrificed love, identity, and softness just to survive the weight of being Tom Cruise. And maybe, just maybe, he had begun to forgive himself. At the beginning of this story, we asked, who could have imagined? Now we know. We've seen the boy who flinched under his father's shadow, the outsider who memorized scripts just to stay afloat, the superstar who broke records and bones, the man who smiled through heartbreak, scandal, and silence. And yet, through it all, he kept running. Not toward fame, not toward money, but toward something no role could ever give him peace. Tom Cruise is still here, still flying, still sprinting across rooftops with the same fire he had at 17. But now, there's a difference. The stunts are louder, the applause is louder, but the man is quieter. Perhaps that's what happens when you've spent your whole life becoming everything for everyone except for yourself. The tragedy of Tom Cruise isn't in his fall. It's in the fact that even at 62, with the world at his feet, we still don't know if he's ever truly arrived. Because how do you come home when you've forgotten what home feels like? So, the next time you see him hanging from a helicopter, defying death once again, remember, you're not just watching a movie star. You're watching a man still trying to prove to himself, to the world, to the father who never stayed, that he was always enough. If this story touched something in you, if behind the legend you saw the lost boy, leave a word, a thought, a thanks. Not just for the actor, but for the human behind the name, Tom Cruise.